and good afternoon from Manila. Greetings of solidarity to everyone. I am Rafaela David from Akbayan Citizens Action Party, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon. For everyone, you are tuning in to the Network of Social Democracy in Asia's webinar series with the theme Feminist Politics. This webinar is part of SocDem Asia's Academy of Progressive Politics Executive Course on Feminism, which runs for the whole month of March. This course, or this executive course on feminism, seeks to aid policy advisors, political educators, and advocates in understanding key concepts on feminism, in learning ways on how to integrate these feminist concepts in their practice, and in constructing ideal societies, including leading and managing organizations. This course also hopes to promote an exchange among peers and experts on practical and innovative tools in feminist education and advocacy. This afternoon, particularly, we will try to be answering how we see feminism in politics. We will try to answer key questions which include how or what are the political challenges faced by the feminist movement today, what characterizes feminist politics and leadership, and how does this translate into feminist practice, may it be in government, in community development, or even in promoting women political participation. More importantly, this afternoon, we will try to answer how do we make our own parties and our own organizations feminist? And what realities do we need to change? And what are those that we need to build together? I would like to call on progressive women politician who served as parliamentarian in Timor-Leste in 2017 and 2018, and now serves as the International Affairs Officer of Fretilin, Timor-Leste. I would like to call on Nurima Al-Katiri to give us the welcome remarks.
It's my honor to welcome you all to this webinar on feminist politics. As most of you know, politics and political organizations in general are still seen as a traditional men's world. And even though we have more and more women involved, we haven't achieved equality, and women and people not identified as traditional men still encounter many challenges to be able to be politically active and to gain leadership positions. And that happens across the world, including in our own organizations, in our own countries. And it will keep happening while we still normalize the patriarchal mindset. Progress has been made, we have to admit, over the many years, and challenges have been overcome. But there is still a lot to be done and many challenges to overcome to truly achieve equality, justice, and respect for all. This webinar is a contribution for that process. As you know, this webinar is part of our first executive course on feminism, hosted by SocDem Asia and coordinated this time by Akbayan and Fretilin, which we are very proud to do. And it has started last week and will run until the end of the month. We are so happy to see that there has been great interest from many members of our sister organizations from many countries in Asia to participate in this course and to be here in this online event. Hopefully, in very short time period, we'll be able to meet again face-to-face. There are many different misconceptions on what feminism is, how a feminist looks like, and to some misconceptions such as feminism means women hating men. There is also the misconception that feminism is different from advocating for gender equality. Feminism is defined with different wording by different people, but in summary, it is the same concept. Feminism is equality, is justice, is tolerance, is acceptance. When I personally think of a definition, the words that come to my mind are the following. Feminism is the force that fights for equality and justice for all. And a feminist is anyone that believes in equality and justice. And to contribute for that continuation and strengthening of this force, to break the cycle of normalization of patriarchal beliefs and mindsets, the course on feminism that is being offered covers key concepts on feminism, including the history and the different types, with the objective to aid our members and people in general to understand them and look into mechanisms on how to apply them within our own organizations, with the aim of creating the social changes that we all want to happen, not only within the organizations, but in the nations as a whole. This course is also an opportunity to create new and reinforced networks towards equality and towards progressive movement. During today's webinar, we have these great speakers that are in front of you. amazing feminists from different parts of the world who will be talking and discussing about their perspectives and experiences on feminism in their parties and organizations, as well as the challenges that they have faced. The webinar will be moderated by my dear comrade Rafaela from Akbayan Party from Philippines, which I'm sure will be doing a great job to monitor your questions and comments as well as part of this webinar. So I'm not taking much longer, so because the discussion is what is the most interesting part of this webinar. I hope everyone enjoys this session and that after it, we can all feel more empowered to together break the cycle of inequality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Norima, and also for the support to my moderation this afternoon. And I do agree, this afternoon we are lucky to have very amazing women leaders, feminists from their countries and organizations who will share with us what it means to be feminist at a time like this, and also how do we put that into practice, and how do we fight for equality and social justice, as you said. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our panel, well, the members of our panel. But I realized before that, for our participants here via Zoom, please take note that we are live on Facebook.
Please to women to speak up.
And please feel free to share it on your Facebook pages or your Twitters so that we can spread the love and a message of equality to more people online.
So this whole question of the challenges of feminism and towards feminist movement, and especially in politics, or not just in politics, in every arena of our lives, be it socio-cultural, financial, political, this can be summed up just with one word, and which is not just in India, but across the world, across the globe, is patriarchy, the patriarchal mindset. And that's the biggest challenge, we had all been fighting, and starting from the early feminists, even till now, we are at different levels, starting from the family to institutional, to institutions, to our workplace, to everywhere we find that there is a patriarchal mindset which we need to fight, and which gets manifested in every aspect of our life. This patriarchy gets manifested, whether it's be it socio-economic, be it socio-cultural, be it financial. So it kind of prohibits equal access to the resources, to life opportunities. And it is very much true in developing countries like India, and as well as developed countries. Many, as I see, there is our friend from Sweden. We have seen that in the Nordic countries, a lot of attempts had been made consciously by the government. For example, women's reservation. We know that women's reservation is one of the most effective ways, to bring about some degree of parity in terms of women's representation. I would just like to give one anecdote. I wouldn't like to get into theory, because even not only just the panelists, but even our participants are also know that what are the kind of problems we face in our workplace, in our everyday life. But when we are talking about politics, I'll just talk about, give one example from India about women's reservation bill. The first attempt to table the women's reservation bill was made in 1996. Today is 2001. And even before it could be tabled, physically, the bill was snatched away by an esteemed member of parliament, who of course happened to be a male, and the bill was torn to pieces. After that, several attempts had been made, and every time there was ruckus, and many a times the member who was presenting the bill was physically stopped. There has been many attempts to literally snatch away the bill. Finally, in 2010, the bill was tabled, and while tabling the bill, the then law minister was presenting the bill. So he was actually surrounded by a few women MPs, so that nobody can snatch away the bill. So this is to this extent, and I'm talking about the parliament, which is the highest legislative body in the country. So there, just by physical presentation of a bill, such an important bill as women's reservation bill, has been prevented by brute force by some male members. So finally, the bill was tabled in 2010. In 2008. In 2010, it was passed in our upper house called Rajya Sabha. But somehow in the lower house, we could not pass the bill, because again, there were a lot of differences of opinion. Even that time we had a coalition government. So even within the coalition government, there was a lot of differences of opinion. Different parties who were part of the coalition did not support the bill. In 2014, there was a new parliament and the bill lapsed. So this is the story. So I'm just giving this one example that how difficult it is, where it comes to a question. Every political party pay lip service to women's empowerment. Every political party, because also women voters are becoming a major chunk of the electoral process. So every political party will have, agenda of in terms of gender equity, in terms of equal opportunity to women. I would also say in India, we have had many legislations which has been passed. In our constitution gives full opportunity to women, equal opportunity in every aspect. But the issue is whether in terms of coming to implementation, there is of course a lot of problems. Because again, whether starting from the police to the general administrations, even to the politicians, we are constantly fighting this patriarchal mindset. And when it comes to actually sharing of power, sharing of gender power, sharing of getting the woman representative in the parliament and as well as the legislative assembly, we have seen that this kind of dramas happening in the parliament. So this is the major problem what we are facing. Of course, we are trying to address it through various institutional, through various work boards, through the laws, through gender sensitization workshops, through training our party workers. But the fight it's a long fight, it's a long battle. And I do hope to learn from my other panelists that what are the issues they face in their countries and how they are kind of addressing these issues. Thank you.
Much, Madam Moderator, and also to my esteemed colleagues. Sometimes you find yourself at a crossroad on what exactly you want to bring to the table when so much has already been covered by your colleagues before you. But I guess when you want to speak about the feminist movement, and as what my colleague from India had mentioned, and also from Timor-Leste, it is defined differently by different people. But the message of what a feminist movement is always the same. It is to achieve justice, it is to achieve equity and equality, and it is also to achieve social justice, particularly for marginalized groups and marginalized women as well. And we have seen over time, particularly in this time of a pandemic, where women are one of the most vulnerable groups that had to bear the brunt of this pandemic, from being victims of domestic violence, from being victims of trafficking, from being victims of modern day slavery, from being victims of in terms of economy, as far as their salaries and wages, the unequal treatment of women at their workplaces. We have seen how journalists have been standing up to try to expose and to speak the truth, especially in a time of a pandemic where we know more and more governments are becoming more and more ultra-nationalist, and that feeds into the very patriarchal, misogynistic propaganda many of these governments have as well. And we know many women journalists and reporters out there are doing their best to expose and to reveal information that would be beneficial for the public. But at a time like this also, I think we have also seen the rise of the women's movement, and in it also underlies the feminist political movement as well. I've always said that two things I've always said, and as you can see behind me, if you can see, I'm in the PWDC office, which is the Penang Women Development Corporation. It is the state agency under the Penang state government to ensure there is gender responsive budgeting, gender equality, gender inclusiveness, etc. And I've always said that number one, if you think that politics is dirty, then you are the people that we are looking for, because we need men and women, particularly young women, to clean up politics. And number two, when women speak, it is very rarely for themselves alone, and it is always for everyone and everything around them, from climate change to the rights of farmers to standing up against an oppressive authority, a government, a tyrannical government, to stand together against corruption, bad practices, to stand up against domestic violence, to stand up for Aboriginal women, disabled women, children, youth, and the elderly. So I think the time is actually perfect to speak about this, given what is happening around the world. Malaysia may not have such great uprising or rallies in the streets or days and days of protests as we have seen in India, as we have just recently seen in Mexico, and making news and headlines every day as what we are seeing in Myanmar. But then it doesn't mean that the stories of these women or the political feminist movement is not there. Again, because it comes under so many guises, and it has so many faces to what a feminist political movement is. And today with social media, I think we have seen more and more women more courageous to share their opinions and their thoughts. And I think it is not just the quantity that we look at, but it is also the quality of the women and the noise, the abundance of noise that these women are making to speak about this political feminist movement. So yeah, In Malaysia right now, at the moment, Penang is the frontline state that is advocating for women-only seats in the state assembly. Through the state government, there are many initiatives to dialogue with naysayers and skeptics, and why do we need to allocate these seats for women? Are we going to compromise on quality? But it's always the same question I throw back at them. If you think that having reserved seats for women at a state level is going to hinder quality or may mar the performance of how state elected legislatives are supposed to perform, then perhaps you should ask the same question back to the men who are elected in. Are we holding that at the same standard as well? And often we find that there's always a different set of rules and standards that are put up against women, demanding for accountability, integrity, hard work, which is sometimes compromised when it comes to men. And of course, the Penang state government is reaching out to speak to MPs, to speak to the public and NGOs, why we need to have these reserved seats for women, so we can have a minimum of that 30% quota of women in a state assembly. But I've also read that 2 days ago, one of the ministers in government has said that she will propose to the Election Commission of Malaysia to have 30% seat reserved for women at a parliamentary level. I'm quite skeptical about this because at the moment, Malaysia, we only have 33 female MPs compared to 222 seats in parliament. So that's like just almost 15%. We're not even there yet. If you have not even created a platform for women or for more women to be given seats to contest in the election, I can just imagine the kind of public outcry against 30% allocated seats for women. Although I'm all for it, I will campaign for it and I will advocate for it. But being something that the government is thinking of, I think the ball is on their court now for them to advocate and have political will to see this through. So that would be my little sharing now, and hopefully we'll be able to share on more subjects and topics later. Thank you.
Hello, Rafaela. Thank you so much. And so very nice seeing all of you this morning. In Sweden, it's around 9 o'clock in the morning, so it's quite early still. I'm going to try to give you an analysis on the challenges that we see from the Social Democratic Party from Sweden when it comes to the feminist movement. And also I would like to stress this early on that having equal list or reserved seats for women is really, really important. In Sweden, we have had equal lists since the beginning of the 1990s, and it has meant a huge change, both in the parliament, but also in the government. So it's something that is really important to try to achieve step by step. And I mean, gender equality, the basis for it all, it's about power, and it has always been contested. And what really is worrying us right now is that we can see that the opposition to gender equality and to women's rights activism has become more vocal, both globally and also better organized in recent years. It has even gained more power through measures taken during this pandemic, which is something I would like to underline especially. We can see that we now have a variety of actors internationally that has emerged and that also has strengthened, including religious groups and conservative actors, right-wing populists and nationalist groups, men's rights groups and anti-gender ideology movements in a way that we haven't seen for quite some time, at least not to say in parts of Europe. And our analysis is that we have two interrelated political developments that are relevant to understand the current success of these forces that oppose women's rights in many countries across the globe. One is, of course, the democratic backsliding that we see, often led by right and sometimes also left-wing populists, but also nationalist governments. And the other is that we also see the closure of civic space as following on the challenges when it comes to the democratic backsliding in some countries. And during the last decade, we have also witnessed a visible drive against gender equality across the globe that we can see also threatens the hard-won gender equality and human rights, including, of course, reproductive rights, but also protection against gender-based violence and funding for women's services. This gender equality backlash is also led by transnational networks of conservative, religious, and right-wing actors, such as some political parties, but also churches, NGOs, and some governments. In Europe, for example, we have these types of governments right now in Poland and Hungary, countries that were on a path towards democracy and more equal rights for women that is now backsliding really fast. And this is inside the European Union. So it's really something that is happening right now. And we can see that this ascendance to power of the right-wing parties in many countries also provides a window of opportunity for these actors to challenge and reverse the gender equality rights and policies. But also we can see increasingly hostile governments that are discrediting gender equality objectives, that are opposing, sidelining the defenders of such rights. As I mentioned, these countries that we now see in Europe. But we also see attacks on gender equality rights, attacks on women's rights groups, and along the way, a change in the state openness to also include women's rights advocates in policy processes in Europe, which is something that is really worrying. Because this alters the relations between women's movement organizations and the state and leads to the backsliding of gender policies in the longer run as well. So, but also in addition, because now we're talking about challenges and then we are going to talk about solutions and possibilities going forward. But in addition, we also have to see that this pandemic has really widened the gender and economic inequalities and the threat that this consists. Women and girls are especially hurt by the resulting economic and social fallout of the pandemic. And we can see that impacts on women and girls have worsened across the board. And also that women are losing their livelihoods faster because they are more exposed to the hard-hit economic sectors around the globe. And also the impacts are not just economic, because the shift of funds to pandemic response is also in some countries hampering women's access to sexual and reproductive health, for example. But also that we can see that violence against women, those reports have increased around the world, as widespread stay-at-home orders also force women to shelter in place with their abusers in their homes, often with tragic consequences. And we can also see that more people staying at home also means that the burden of the unpaid care and domestic work has increased for women and girls, for example, literally driving some to the breaking point, actually. So I think that we have to really understand right now we are facing a lot of challenges, and we have to take also the consequences of the pandemic into account when we are starting with forcefully, hopefully, to build back better again, because that is something that we really, really want to do. I will stop there just initially, not on a very positive note, but anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. And now we go to Katerina Sharoni for her thoughts.
Good afternoon once again. For the many things you were saying, I would say that also inside the International Union of Socialist Youth, we are experiencing them as youth and as women that are young women. I would say about the quotas discussion that also when it's achieved, like in many European countries, it's not said it's for granted. For example, in Italy, we are experiencing the situation in which inside parties it's not always respected. Also, if that election is respected with lists that are composed by men and women at 50%. I would say that the challenges that we are facing in the international movement of youth is mainly a fight against invisibility. Maybe you read the last book of Caroline Criado Perez that is called Invisible, that moves the analysis from the invisibility of women. It moves the analysis from one of the gaps between men and women, that is the data gender gap, the loss of data about history, the health, the future of women, and instead for men we know a lot of history of health, and the consequences are risky for women, especially when we talk about health. If we do not recognize symptoms of a disability, of a health problem with women, because we do not know enough about women's body, this is a problem that is really risky, in which inequality is something we pay so much. Another problem we are facing, I would say, it's about dishumanity. We are facing the fact that inside our world, 30,000 children each day are forced to early marriage. And it seems sometimes it's something against which we can do nothing, or we can do enough. I would say, and this was a point that emerged already in the discussion, that feminism, and the one challenge of feminism is also the sustainability and climate change, because it's a patriarchal society that brings us to the objective in the production and to this capitalism, in which we do not care about the consequence of the production process. And instead, we have to take into consideration the rights of the people, the sustainability of the environment when we want to earn capital and so on. I would say also that, and this was in the discussion too, that feminists today, and it has always been like that, it's a fight for rights for the women. During the last year, we followed directly many fights, especially in Argentina, for the right to abortion for women, and we are facing and the last speaker was saying we are facing a reduction of rights also inside the European Union that is risky and that has directly consequences for women. And I would say one challenge that is a synthesis of all the others is that the gender gap can also enlarge, increase, not only reduce. If we look at the Global Gender Gap Report from the World Economic Forum of 2020, we can see that many countries and also many regions in the world are losing positions in health and survival, in job and economic participation, in educational attainment, in political empowerment. And one reason is especially the one you were talking about loss of jobs during the pandemic experience that regards, especially in the Southern European countries, mainly the women, because they are really committed to work inside the houses, work for the family, we would say care work. But this is also one aspect of inequality and of unequal participation to the labor market and the economy and the social advance of our countries. And I would say this is something we should face, and it's very practical as an impact, very direct to the life of women. So this is my contribution, adding only some points to the discussion.
I think you're on mute, Sharissa.
Okay, here we go. So when we talk about feminist politics, one is, of course, the gender politics itself, that which you are fighting as an activist, as a gender activist, you are fighting for empowerment, for equal rights, for equality. Second aspect of it is that when you are fighting as a politician, as a woman politician, and you are in the mainstream politics, and especially if you are in electoral politics. So there are different dimensions to it. When we're talking about women in politics, there is one, when we see that how many women are involved in the political participation, and in that political participation means not only just being involved as an active politician, but also as a very conscious citizen. So this is something that getting more and more women involved in the stream of political awareness is equally important as women participating as active politicians, as active political activists. So for example, in India, we have seen that increasingly there are a number of women voters. And these women voters, I would say, are conscious voters. They are no longer, they don't listen to what the men in the family say, what the head of the family say, and then go and vote. No. As a result, what is happening, and which I would say very good, that every political party have started seeing women as chunk voters, and they're, at least in terms of promising and in terms of their manifestos, they're getting issues related to women, to a woman empowerment, to make women's life easier. So they have started addressing, every political party have at least started addressing certain concerns of women, and they're at least promising, and through their manifesto, and even after forming the government, also through various government policies. So this is one aspect. The second aspect, I would say that in terms of political participation of women. Of course, increasingly we are seeing that more and more women are participating in active politics, whether in terms of student politics, whether in terms of continuing it later within the party organization. But the number perhaps should have been far more. We represent 50% of the population. So even 50% of the political workers also should be women, but it is far, far less. Obviously, one of the reasons, again, we are saying that lack of access in terms of finances, in terms of cultural ethos, all those kind of things, I don't need to elaborate. One of the major problems, my being in politics and after, is financial. In a country like India, men are always, politics is something, it's not a full-time guaranteed job. I mean, you start as an activist, there is no surety, there is no remuneration at the end of the month that, you are going to get some money out of it. There is no surety that, forget about getting nomination for an election, that you are going to get a party post. Yet, it's a 24/7 job. It's a 24/7 job, whether you are working with people or whether working within the organization. So most of the problem the women face is from their family members. That why are you wasting so much of time? What are you going to get out of it? Where is the security? So that is one of the biggest problems we see. And also, that's why we see that, in a country like India, the family members are willing to invest more in their male children. So these similar problems, this insecurity, this financial instability, it cuts across politicians, across gender. Even men also go through the same problems. But the family is willing to invest in a male child. That's fine, you go and do it, and if you become something, it will be great. But they're not willing to invest in a woman child in that sense, in terms of financial help, in terms of the time, in terms of support. So that is one of the biggest problems in terms of not only women coming and joining politics, but sustaining it in the long run. And as it is a very pyramidal structure, it becomes more and more competitive. You are expected to give more and more time, more and more resources. So you tend to fall out of the race, not because you are not capable, but because of other paraphernalias, socioeconomic paraphernalias. Now, there was a very interesting question that feminist leadership and how does it translate in terms of community development, in terms of governance. Of course, when we see that when there are a large number of women, we bring across a different aspect. We bring across a different point of view on the table. That goes without saying. But I have been asking myself that when you become a political, so for example, we have a member of parliament sitting here. When you become a member of parliament or an elected representative of people, you are not just representing women, you are representing everybody. In terms of when you are deciding on a policy, you are not going to keep into mind just the woman voters, just the woman constituency. It has to be an overall thing. In that, how much of feminist point of view comes in terms of getting it translated into government policies? So here I would say, just because a woman leader, not necessarily your policies will reflect that point of view. I would just give an example from one state in our country called West Bengal, and which has got a woman chief minister, currently the only woman chief minister in our country. And she also leads a regional party. She's a leader of the party. She's a very ferocious, firebrand leader, literally came up from the grassroots, Mamata Banerjee. So she has been woman chief minister. This is now the state is going for the election soon. So this is going to be her. She has already completed 2 terms as chief minister. But unfortunately, that particular state, in terms of women's security, has got one of the worst records in the country. It is one of the top 3 states where women security. And unfortunately, some of our women ministers also have a very casual attitude towards it. So despite having a woman chief minister, we are seeing that one of the most important aspects, like women's security, is not really you can't be saying that, because of a woman chief minister, this state has progressed very well on that particular aspect. But on the other hand, in terms of women's participation, for example, in 2019, we had our parliament election. So from her party, she gave the largest number of tickets to women candidates. So it's very difficult to say. What I'm trying to say, it does not necessarily mean that just because you become a woman leader and you become in a position of power to influence policies, you not necessarily would, it would be from a gender equality point of view. But yes, somewhere I feel it does. And that is why I think a larger number of women is required. One thing is to be individually empowered. But until unless you have that collective voice, that collective empowerment, even individual decision-taking in policy making also becomes very difficult. So this is the point. And, I would also like to just end with one point. In our absolutely grassroots level, local level of governments, we have a 3-tier government, absolutely the municipal level, and in the villages, what we have called the panchayat. So there we have women's reservation. It was done through the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. And that was done by a male prime minister, by the way. But so there at the grassroots level of governments, we had 33%, but now almost all the states have made it 50%. Now there are several studies to show that where there are women councillors, where there are women panchayat, in terms of delivery, it's much better. Including one study by Abhijit Banerjee, the Nobel laureate couple Abhijit Banerjee and Duflo, which they did the same study in West Bengal in terms of certain delivery of very basic facilities of everyday life. So the study showed, and there are several other studies to show that where the civic bodies are led by women, the delivery is actually much better, for whatever reason it might be. So when you women are brought into in a large number, and given that opportunity, and in terms of decision making, in terms of implementing those decisions, I think they do as in their collective capacity, they perhaps do a very, very good job. Thank you.
Looking at the question that was actually given to us earlier of what characterizes feminist politics and leadership, I think this subject, for decades has come across as being something that only women were championing, only because women felt that there was a vacuum. There was a need to talk about the feminist political movement. There was a vacuum. There was a lacuna even in the laws. to speak about it. And when you had more and more women speaking about it, and of course men, getting on board to pursue and to push for that, you see more and more women's issues taking a more national stage. It becomes part of the national agenda. It becomes part of a political party's national agenda as well. And that's what that I've been stressing a lot. Every time MPs or activists or even the man on the street says, oh, we need change in the system, or we need change in the way the government is doing things, sometimes it is always just the same people saying you need change. It's always the same faces that say there's a problem with the system. It's always the same people, whether it's men or women, who are saying, hey, we need to follow better practices by other countries. We need to keep up to international standards. But how do we then normalize the feminist political movement so that it can relate to the man and the woman on the street, so that it is to every individual country for Malaysia? How do we Malaysianize a feminist political movement so that these three words are not looked as anarchist and anti-peace and violent movement, as how I understand conservative and very right-wing government will immediately paint a picture upon. The minute you speak about feminist political movement, you will have the nationalists and the conservative and the right wing and even the left, as how Anika had mentioned, would immediately, you chop it even before it starts to gain momentum. So I think that when the subject of women's issues, women's rights, and the feminist political movement becomes normalized in your language. And in Malaysia, even though I speak to you in English now, but the national language is Bahasa Malaysia. And, you have to take that into consideration, how it transcends across language for the woman on the street to understand. I cannot go to a woman who comes from a lower socioeconomic rung, an Indian woman, and talk to her about feminist political movement when I cannot relate that to her in Tamil, for example. So I think that is one of the challenges that I face. And I think bringing it back to an organization, to make that a part of the national framework of any organization, of any political party. And just to share with you, my party, the Democratic Action Party, through an amendment to our party constitution, now we will have 30% of women who will be in the central executive committee. And prior to that, of course, democratically elected, and we also have a few places who will be co-opted in. But there was, again, a great need to have more female voices in the Central Executive Committee, which is the decision-making body of the party, of my party. And that has actually been viewed as very progressive, even though members in my party itself have shown their reservations on why do we need to have this 30%, are we going to compromise on the quality of this? Is the biggest decision-making body, and are we just going to have women sitting in it because they're women? Which brings us back to the drawing board. Why we don't hold men to those sort of standards? Do they deserve to sit in the committee or not, or are they just sitting there as tokens to represent communities, etc.? Only when you give it the importance and put it out there. For example, as we have seen and we have heard, more female voices are speaking on bread and butter issues. More female voices are speaking on women's issues. More female voices are speaking on children's issues. And in Malaysia, after the change of regime last year, in 2020, we have seen such a horrible underperforming Minister for Women, Family and Community Development. In fact, I believe her 1 year achievement, because it's been 1 year that they've been in government, Perikatan Nasional, this backdoor illegitimate entity, that I believe that her greatest achievement was actually for herself, where she managed to lose a lot of weight and look actually really good. But apart from that, for her as a minister, her portfolio, one of the biggest portfolios in the cabinet in the country, where you have to take care of women, the disabled, the aged, the children, and welfare, we have not come across as a successful. She cannot tell a successful story. Her foot soldiers, the officers on the ground, I think they are working much harder than the minister. So when you also need to have that sort of framework to say what is it that you need to do, and what is it that you need to push for in your national agenda if you want to empower women, if you want to speak about gender equality, gender inclusiveness, gender responsive budgeting, to speak on child rights, girls, the rights of the girl child, and etc. So you have to have that in black and white. You have to have that in the policy. You have to have that in legislation. And again, lawmakers are nothing without civil society backing them up, keeping us on our toes and reminding us on pledges that we have made. And this is why it is important, even for civil society, to have a feminist political agenda within their own framework. And I just want to quickly share with you on this an Islamic movement in Malaysia called Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia, ABIM. So over the years, ABIM is always very easily associated to the religious struggle or the religious context or aspect or anything that touches on Islam. Abim is always there to comment. But Abim is also breaking their own glass ceilings to speak about climate change and to have women as well on their panelists to speak about it. So here you have an entity that is quite powerful in terms of their religious influence, but they're also speaking about gender, and they're also speaking about climate change, and they're also speaking about the environment, apart from speaking about social justice, democracy, equality, and freedom. So I think it's also to move outside having only women speak about women's issues, but to also rope in my opinion, religious leaders as well. And I always say that places of worship are by far places where men, women, and children go, where there's you don't get a free coupon to buy things after that. You don't get a freebie when you go to a place of worship. You don't get a free t-shirt or a goodie bag. It's a place where you go out of obligation. So religious leaders stand at a very unique position to speak about the feminist political movement. I don't know if that answered the question or not. I sort of went all over the place and came back. But thank you.
And I think very important points, and asking who we the feminists are and who our allies are. I think that's very important. And I also want to point out what you said earlier, which actually breaks my heart. And I think Ina from the chat also said it. Like when we ask for seats in power, they question, are we sacrificing quality by giving women spaces? And that's really problematic, right? Because in the first place, how can women actually train how to hold power if we're not given the chance? And I think looking at the panel we have here, we have women who've taken up positions in power, and we can say that from the answers we've gotten and the depth of the discussion just this afternoon, we can do so much if the spaces are available and accessible to us. So we go now to Annika.
Thank you, Rafaela. And it's so incredibly inspiring to listening to the sisters that has been speaking before me, actually. I'm going to try to be a little short. First of all, when we talk about what should characterize the feminist policies, politics, and leadership today, I think that what differs between more female politics and men is that we stand for a leadership of inclusion, of anti-discrimination, of respect, of courage, of self-awareness, working hard as women leaders to dismantling this sort of bias that we have just been speaking about here when it comes to women and their competence. I mean, actually, it has a little to do with gender. It has everything to do with how you view yourself, but also how you view other people around you. And I think I also want to really underline what some of the other speakers have said, that it's very easy also to get stuck in your own reality and forget the inclusion of every woman, independent of their status. We are social democrats. And I actually have a quote that always makes me remember that feminist practices has to be for everyone, from the poorest to the richest of us. And it goes like this: while we all worry about the glass ceiling, there are millions of women standing on the basement, and the basement is flooding. And our feminist practices needs to be inclusive on every level. And that is something that we really have to carry in our leadership. But I also want to be very concrete with you. I mean, the struggle for gender equality in Sweden has been a very, very long struggle that has been going on for like 100 years. And these last decades, we have been really successful. And one of the main things, as I also started out with today, was the possibility to get enough women into parliament and into government, that you really aren't just a few individuals, but that you are more of a collective. Then you can make change for real. And as I said earlier, since the 1990s in Sweden, the Social Democratic Party has had 50% men and 50% women on all lists. And also when we have been in government since the 90s, there has been 50% women in the government position as ministers. I was a minister for the last 5 years for social affairs in Sweden. And then you can ask yourself, how does this affect the policies? Yeah, I would say it affects it in every way. In 2014, when the Social Democratic Party came to power, and we are still in power right now, we asked in the elections for a mandate to be the first feminist government in the world. And we also got that mandate from the voters, so fantastic. But how does it then affect our policies? Well, take one example. I have a really strong role model, a woman, our former foreign minister, Margot Wallström, that when she became the foreign minister in 2014, it was the third time she was a minister. She has also been in the European Commission as a commissioner. Then she put forward the world's first feminist foreign policy that has affected the way that Sweden works all around the world, putting gender equality at the heart of our foreign policy, at all our embassies, in the UN, when we in every aspect, actually. So, I mean, when you get the crucial mass of women into parliament and into politics, and also really you can really advocate and work for also feminist reforms that make lives better for more women, that makes the possibility for more women also to take important positions in society. So it's like, yeah, you get, like we say in Sweden, you get the snowball rolling, actually. And I also would like to say something about how can we also affect our parties at our national level. And I think it's lead by doing. As women leaders, give women and girls around you power and opportunities, and work for securing influence within your own party and at all levels where you have the possibility. Support each other. Sisterhood, actually. Thank you.
Sisterhood. Thank you for that, Annika. I think there are very specific questions to what you just said. So I will just point to them, that maybe inclusion, I suppose, all encompassing or broadest umbrella, will that make it weaker because it's too broad or too weak? Is that a possibility? Or maybe those are not necessarily, that it shouldn't necessarily be the case, that making a big umbrella may not necessarily lead to weakness? Just maybe a quick answer to that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's you always have to have the two glasses on you so that you don't undermine your work for more gender equality. I mean, it's like the basis that you get more shared responsibility between women and men, and then you can work also much stronger for inclusion in a larger sense. So I don't think it's not opposite, but it's a part of a development going forward, actually.
Okay. Thank you, Annika, for that follow-up answer. Now we go to Katerina.
Thank you. I also think it's really inspiring to listen to you. I would say that basically feminist politics and feminist leaderships are something that brings into politics justice, because you are going to represent our society. And the first progressive value should be being representatives of the society, entire society. And we are always treated as a minority, but actually in some countries and in the world, we are the majority of the population. So it's something crazy. And this is the reason for which I think that having feminist politics and feminist leaderships means that we are bringing intersectionality inside politics and leadership and policies. Because it's something which you grow up caring on how to make nobody is excluded from policies and nobody is excluded from leadership. It's something that the standard male leader cannot understand, because he thinks maybe that his point of view is an objective point of view, is the entire reality. And it's not like that, because nobody has an entire perception of the reality and on what to do for policies and inside politics. That's why, for example, simply having a woman in leadership, in charge, means for many girls, for many women, to see that it's possible to take part in democratic processes, to take part in activism, and maybe get power. But because if we have just one standard of leadership, of political participation, with all the works it happens, you think it's not for you. It's not your possibility, your chance to do it. And I think that leadership is one very tricky question inside also progressive parties, because we give quotas to women, and this is mostly accepted in some parts of the world, but in the way that you nominate women, you control women or people inside, for example, your fraction in the party or in the party. But the main point is for women to lead the process. This is something to try to achieve. And on how we build feminism, I think our experience as a youth international movement is to try not to teach to others what feminism is, because we have to handle with religion, we have to handle with tradition, and it's just people, the person by person, country by country, understanding how we can advance, how we can achieve an advance in position in equality, and try to collect experiences, of course inspired by common values, that is equality, that is empowerment for women, but trying to understand how we achieve that inside each country. For example, we are not only following what's happening in Myanmar, but last week we heard about the discussion of a law in Nepal to avoid women leave the country before they are forced poverty. And of course, is something that we should care to. We should try to understand, but with local communities, with local activists, how we can help, because we don't know how to help from an external perspective. Because, for example, in my country, in Italy, many political traditions are also Christian tradition, Catholic tradition, and this is inside the mind of people. So may Italian knows better how to face that mindset, how to change maybe some mindsets, and I think this is fundamental. So we developed in USI a feminist toolkit to give to our youth organization, and maybe we will discuss it to the next question. But we built it in that way, sharing ideas with all the people that are active in USI, active in their own organization, to understand how each principle can be shared and practiced between and inside each member organization.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. Hello, Ate Paeng, and hello to all the panelists. Thank you so much. This is such a great and cool opportunity, and it's been really, really interesting hearing all of you share your experiences and give your thoughts about feminism. My question comes from the thing that I'm always worried about, which is that I never know what I don't know. So my question is following in that vein, that I would like to ask you, what have you not spoken about that you think people should know about feminism, or that you think the participants of the executive course should know? It can be maybe an experience you had in the past that you think people should be prepared for, or a topic that you think we should be talking about that wasn't discussed yet. So very in the vein of not knowing what you don't know.
This is a very point which has been raised by the lady who spoke just now, and also Kasturi, about participation of other agents in the feminist movement. This is something I had always been talking about, and I was thinking of making it a kind of concluding remark if the chance arose. But of course, now I got an opportunity. You see, in this feminist discourse, all our panel members were women. And anywhere we go, this is exactly the case. Now, why should that be? The gender discourse is just not about women. It's about equality, and equally important to have men participate in this. Otherwise, in a way, we are just marginalizing the women's issue. And this is something, I have always raised within my party also. Like, I'm a spokesperson, I have to go for debates. Now, whenever there is price rise or inflation, it is as if it's just, especially food inflation, women are supposed to go because they run the kitchen. Well, we do run the kitchen, but we also do many other things other than running the kitchen. Similarly, if there is a security, if there is a rape is just not women's problem. Rape is a societal problem, everybody's. So I think, this is extremely important to have men, and why just men, the third gender, the transgenders, it has to be gender, has to be a very, very inclusive, and when we're talking about, whether it's from religion, whether it's from the corporate sector, whether it's from, that's a different issue. We are talking about different segments. But, when we are talking about gender, when we are talking about feminism, gender equality, I think we must all make it a point that next time, whenever we go to a panel discussion, this is the duty of the organizer to have also a couple of men involved in the discussion. And I'm glad to see, a few male participants. So this is one point I really wanted to make. Another point which I made, that, in terms of women, the political awareness, of women, those who are not necessarily, involved in active politics. I think this is perhaps she was also talking about that, how to do it, women face threats. Even if you go out on the street, not necessarily you will be spared. You cannot be guaranteed that you will be spared of a sexual comment or some kind of, what we India is called eve-teasing. So in any case, even if you are not in public life, in any case, we are not ensured a very, very secure environment. Even your home, at your home, you could be, exposed to domestic violence, for example. So there is no way, there is no guarantee that, if you don't participate, if you don't become more vocal, you are going to be spared. It's not like that. So in any case, potentially all of us, we do face the threat every day. So why not might as well go there and speak your mind out and really participate, really make your voice heard. So I think this is extremely important because, nobody can guarantee that safety and security. Of course, we all wish for it and we are all working towards it. But somewhere, just because, we are threatened, like we might, if there is, we are crossing the road, we might get hit if the traffic light is not working, but doesn't mean we are not going to cross the road. So this is something, I think all of us, we need to, especially from the marginalized section of society, whereas in terms of religiously marginalized groups, whether in terms of gender, whether in terms of anything, I think we have to just come out, be vocal. To what extent you want to get involved, that is, of course, your own individual choice. But whether, even if it's just through social media, even just in a friendly discussion, just talking to your family, whatever it is, I think we need to voice, we need to be vocal. Okay. That's really the first step, and that's the only step. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharmista. And on that note, we want to recognize also that we thank all the male participants who joined the executive course on feminism. Thank you for being allies. And I think this is what Anika said also, the politics of inclusion. I don't think it can be broad enough. At the end of the day, it's not us versus them. It's about creating bigger spaces, safe spaces, bigger collectives as much as we can. So anyone else who wants to share maybe tips on how to enter those spaces, as Ina asked, and maybe some things that we should that haven't discussed yet, but some things that are important for us women feminist activists and male feminists as well who are in the room. Okay, I see Katerina and even Norima who wants to share. Katerina?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think these are connected. I fully subscribe the last speech. And I have to say, inside UC, we built a space that is the feminist working group that is for everybody, not for women. I have to say that in Italy, the major progressive party has a conference for women, where only women can speak about feminism. And this is totally, this makes me crazy because it's not fair. And it's something for which we are not solving the problem of involving women. It's the answer, I think, to Cassie's question about what we missed to discuss. It's feminism by male. And also about the tricks. I think that one first trick to involve and to make feminism grow is to involve men and explain men that patriarchy has consequence on their life too. Work-life balance that is okay for our lives. It's not a matter for women. It's also a matter for men. A political participation that is equal. It's something that brings justice, as we were saying before. Because if they think that quotas means that not adequate women will participate in politics, then they are thinking that women are less than men, and it's the problem. And it's not like that. As leadership from women all around the world show us. So I think it's one key point. It's discussed with men how feminism could be a battle for them too, for the quality life too, for the environment they live too, for the society they live too. Because otherwise we define ourselves progressive, but not only poor people fight for poor people, not only LGBTQI people fight for their rights, and so not only women should fight for feminism.
Thank you, Katerina. We go to Norima, and I saw Anika, I think, raising her hands earlier. So please go ahead, Norima.
Thank you, Rafaela. I just want to add a few points to what the other panelists have already said, and very well said. Yes, this panel was only women, but there is always that question of, do we give enough space to women to speak up? So should we give one of those spaces to men when we have other women that can put their voices in? I'm not saying that we shouldn't include men, not at all. I'm an advocate that men have to be included, because for us to have real change, men also have to change the way they behave. Coming back to, we educate women to speak up, and we have to educate boys to also be better men and to respect women. But we also can't forget that when we talk about equality, we are not only talking about women and men or women versus men. We are also talking about equality. We have to include the LGBT community, which is very important to have their views and their perspective on this kind of panels. And there, in Fretilin, it's still quite a challenge to have men involved in gender equality discussions. I'm very proud to say that for this course, we were able to include several men and also members of the LGBT community, leaders of the LGBT community, which I think it's a step forward for us. Thank you.
Anika, did you want to add?
Just very, very shortly. First of all, I think it's so hugely important to underline that gender equality is not a gift for women. It's a question of human rights. And that's the reason why it's equally important for men to be involved. It's their responsibility because it's a question of human rights. We can't forget that. But also, I think that the perspectives of including men, of course, you should also take into account that we also really need to make sure that women's voices continue to get heard. For example, in the Social Democratic Party, when we have a Congress, for example, we count speakers, so that we should have fairly enough equality between male and female speakers on the Congress. I mean, this is a known way how you can work in a very concrete way in different measures. But above all, I also want to underline that for women to take space within our own organizations is also to get organized and support each other. Yeah.
So on behalf of the Akbayan Citizens Action Party, Fretilin, Timor-Leste, and of course, the network of social democracy in Asia, headed by Macris Cabreros, who's here somewhere, we thank you again and see you. Good luck in your course and for more faces of hope, as Kasturi said, and for women empowerment, equality, and justice, we fight forward. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Good night. Happy lunch to Annika and Katerina. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.